Please don't feel badly. Please don't feel badly if you have to leave. We have lives, and I'm just honored for whatever time that you can give me and that we can spend together. I'm going to start with a reading, and then I'll explain why I'm starting with it. Ad Hashem neshama shenatati li tohorahi. This is a prayer in every Siddur, no matter what flavor of Judaism you pray with. It means, oh my God, the soul which you placed within me is pure. You created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me, and you preserve it within me. You will one day take it from me, but will restore it to me in the hereafter. So long as the soul is within me, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, my God, God of my fathers, master of all works. This prayer is part of the daily morning service. Every day we say it. It appears almost verbatim also in the Talmud. That means that we have more than 2,000 years of saying this prayer every day. And it continues to be really a succinct statement of the Jewish approach to life and to death. It's no small coincidence that our toast, and one of the things that we are happy to say often, is l'chaim. We're given life by God, and we treasure every moment of that life. Inevitably, death is going to come, and our lives will end, and we can never know when that event will happen. But we believe that we have some kind of existence in Olam Haba, the world to come. But that precise nature of that existence is not revealed to us. This is the essence of the prayer that traditional Jews recite every morning and are in the holiday and Shabbat prayer books of every denomination. At the same time, even though we are enjoying life and recognizing it and lauding it, the Jewish tradition doesn't flinch from the reality of death. The rabbis instruct us to repent the day before we die, but it's asked, how do we know when that's going to happen? Therefore, we are told we should be penitent throughout our lives. I chose to begin with that reading because this is a very traditional view of Judaism. It is the one, as I mentioned, that has been around for many thousands of years. And there are always different interpretations, and we're going to talk about them. And these interpretations are really not denomination specific, they're more individual specific. There are certainly different rabbis who teach different viewpoints. But I also believe that it would be appropriate today, and that's why I choose to direct myself in a traditional format, that we inform ourselves of the tradition, because we need to make our choices from an understanding and from a knowledge of what there is. We feel more confident if we understand traditional Judaism. So many of my sources today are going to really stem from what would be called traditional Judaism. One thing is that we absolutely believe in a world to come, but that's kind of where it ends, because that statement, and we'll look at it in more detail in a little bit, is kind of a fuzzy one. It's variable. We don't know. In other religions, there's a very detailed painted picture of what comes next. We really don't have that. I'm sure you've heard many times, and it's true, that Judaism is not heaven focused, it's earth focused. However, heaven is important to us, and it is basic to our tradition. Death also has a place in our tradition as a normal process, a natural process. And that means a process that we recognize, that we admit to, we discuss, and that we prepare for. At the core, there's something eternal, there's a soul. At the core, we are focused on what's happening now more than that. I can only give you today an overview on things, but if anybody's interested in anything that I say to study it more in depth, I would be honored, more than happy to either talk to you about it or point you to more specific references. There's just really no way to cover it all. As you know, there really never is. Let's talk about death. Again, I'm going to introduce you proudly to some traditional sources that are very, very well known. Rava, while sitting at the bedside of Rav Nachman, saw that he was dying. Said Rabbi Nachman to him, "Please tell the angel of death not to torment me." Said Rava, "Are you not a person of importance? Can't you appeal to the angel of death yourself?" Rav Nachman replied, "Who is esteemed, who is regarded, who is distinguished before before the angel of death? We are all equal." Rava said, "I will appeal for you, but promise me that you will show yourself to me in a dream after you die." He did so. Rava asked him, "Did you suffer much while you died?" Rav Nachman replied, "As little as when you remove a hair from milk. Yet, if God were to say to me, 'Go back again to the world as you were,' I would not wish to do so because my fear of death was so great." This image of removing a hair from milk is classical Jewish view of what dying should be, traditionally should be, and could be, and is. There are things in modernity that make that more complicated. And of course, as we know, even in old times, things don't always happen the way they should be. But that image is one that I'd like you to capture because it is very, very consistent with our belief system in terms of a view to approach death. And at least at some level, maybe 1/10 of 1%, helping allay some fears. Basically, our fear of death from the time that that text came into being has grown, not diminished, since Rabbi Nachman's time. Maybe because we've put our faith in so many tools with which to tame it. Today, as I mentioned before, it's really hard to face it. Often don't talk about it, very often don't prepare. And it's also a given that regardless of circumstances, we should aggressively prolong life. Dying, therefore, becomes a medical process, not a natural process. That's the danger. I wanted to share with you, and I think this is probably as good a place as any, an image I have in a video I saw called "From Toledo to Jerusalem" many years ago. I think I still have it. And it's about many Sephardic customs that were taken from Spain to um, uh, Jerusalem after the expulsion of the Jews. And one of them is the giving of a gift on somebody's 60th birthday of their kittel, their burial shroud. That's a birthday present on the 60th birthday. And people applaud. There's a photo. Excuse me, I shouldn't say applaud, but they're joyful. There is a feast involved with it. It's a birthday party, basically, gift. And so much so that even the guest, the honoree, tries it on. I know that it's kind of not what you expected, and I don't know if any of you have experienced or knew about that, but I wanted to share you because that kind of is the polar opposite of the way many people would think of what should be a birthday present on a 60th birthday. Just saying, okay? So let's talk for a sec about the biblical idea of dying. So in the Torah, excuse me, I've got a game here of glasses changing, one to see you guys on the screen, another one to read small print. In the Torah, there is no explicit reference to the world to come, nor are there any statements about the judging of souls. There are a few clues, however, about afterlife, but they're really hard to understand. So when the great leaders of the Bible die, such as Moses and Aaron and King David and Isaac, the expression that's used is gathered unto their people. Well, what does that mean? It's really hard to know. So most Jews in America today, according to people who study such things, do not accept the idea of any sort of afterlife. As a result, it might come as a surprise to us that Judaism has always believed in the inevitability of some kind of afterlife, but we're not sure, as I've said, what form it takes. Talking about end of life is the first topic that we're going to examine. Let me see where I hid my book. Couldn't be too far here. Here it is, right in front of me. One of the books that, and I'm not even sure I'm gonna. This is a book with a wonderful title and a wonderful beginning. It's called "The Beauty of What Remains." It's by Rabbi Steve Leder. It's pretty recent, and the title is almost the most valuable part of this book. That's part of the reason I'm reluctant to record things, because I say things that maybe can get me into hot water later. But the tagline is "How Our Greatest Fear Becomes Our Greatest Gift." And this is a beautiful book for the purpose of which he wrote it, which is to teach us some things about dealing with dying people and death. But also it's a tribute to his dad, who had recently passed away. And a large part of the core of the book that is more general is really in the first several chapters. Having said that, he talks about visiting the dead, the dying, and he talks about, as we know, I think we know it's a mitzvah to visit, and as we know, many people find it very, very difficult. But having said that, he quotes a psychologist, a Soviet psychologist, who has done a study that says that you can show a picture to people of a full circle, and then there'd be a tiny little wedge cut out of that circle, and their eyes go first to that missing piece. And he suggests that that's what we humans do when we go visit people who are failing, that we could very well think about the whole of their lives and of that person and what they have to offer, but we have a tendency to focus on what is missing. It's really important to remember that there's so much more to who they were and who we were than just that missing piece. And then he goes to talk about, you can read it yourself if you want, or I can send you the source, but just about being normal, just about not avoiding topics that people don't want to talk about. You don't have to be somber. You don't have to avoid the subject. He mentions that people are generally not afraid in their dying days of dying, the death. What they're afraid of is how the people around them, who they care about, are going to be, that they're going to be okay. He also says jokes are fine, humor is fine. It's just an interesting concept. It's well done. And he has visited hundreds of deathbeds. So I think he has some credibility with this particular message. Again, one of his messages is that people are not really scared of dying, but they're scared for the ones that they love. Now I'm going to go and see how my tech, which has not been cooperating today very well, works. I can get this set up. I want to share something with you that I think you'll find interesting. Okay, we'll start this. Oh, the ads keep flickering on. This is something. I know I'm not sharing yet. I just want to be ready. Okay, this is actually an audio. There is no video to it, but I just wanted to show you a picture of Rabbi Jason Weiner, so you have something to look at besides me. And this is from a interview that was done 3 years ago by Erusheva, which is an Israeli radio station in English, also publication. And the topic is the fine line between life and death. And this particular cut from this is an hour and 5 minutes long. And don't worry, we're not doing that. I'm going to try to find the appropriate part. But Rabbi Weiner is the chaplain at Cedar Sinai in Los Angeles. He serves all faiths, but clearly he focuses, because there are many, many Jews at that hospital, on people of the Jewish persuasion who wish to have the services of a chaplain. And the topic that he is, the title of the whole thing is Between Life and Death, and he deals with this on many levels. There's so many topics in this particular hour that there's no way I can cover. I just wanted to give you a slice. And if you're interested, I'll be happy to give you the link. I'm going to find a piece. There may be, I said it, but I may have lost
it. And he says to me, Rabbi, I need you to tell me a sense of it's not functioning, but a person is on a respirator, their body will stay alive. And
okay, excuse death, me. You can tell
very often. I know you said that there was a hospital through. Definitely, there is a difference. I definitely seen in my time in Israeli hospitals, it's easier to navigate Jewish law in those hospitals. Definitely. First of all, people are more aware of Jewish law in Israel than in any hospital in the U.S. Maybe in New York that there's more of an awareness, but I'm not even certain of that. Certainly in Cedars-Sinai and L.A., there's more of an awareness of Jewish law.
This is where I want to start.
Yeah, that's true. Well, DNR is a challenging issue. Many Jews tend to think that DNR, which means do not resuscitate, is automatically forbidden. And it's always going to be forbidden no matter what. That's something that we don't do. And sort of by default, they're not wrong. I mean, it is not something that we turn to right away. We don't give up easily. We do try to prolong life, and we do try to take our chances to do everything we can to keep people alive. We believe in the value of life, the beauty of life, and the Israel that try to conform to Jewish law. But there definitely is, I think, more of a kind of like vitalist or pro-life type of kind of attitude in Israeli hospitals. They're more used to having religion part of decision making. There's more often rabbis involved. So definitely there is a difference. I definitely seen in my time in Israeli hospitals, it's easier to navigate Jewish law in those hospitals. Definitely. First of all, people are more aware of Jewish law in Israel than in any hospital in the U.S. Maybe in New York that there's more of an awareness, but I'm not even certain of that. Certainly in Cedars-Sinai and L.A., there's more of an awareness of Jewish law.
Sorry, I don't know why it skipped.
Yeah, that's true. Well, DNR is a challenging issue. Many Jews tend to think that DNR, which means do not resuscitate, is automatically forbidden. And it's always going to be forbidden no matter what. That's something that we don't do. And sort of by default, they're not wrong. I mean, it is not something that we turn to right away. We don't give up easily. We do try to prolong life, and we do try to take our chances to do everything we can to keep people alive. We believe in the value of life, the beauty of life, and the importance of being alive for every moment, and that there's potential inherent in that. At the same time, as we do everything we can to prolong life, we also don't want to prolong the dying process or prolong suffering. You know, we do have a story in the Talmud that teaches us that. That's the story of the death of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the great rabbi who authored and compiled the Mishnah. Judah the Prince. Judah the Prince. When he was dying, he had a woman who was kind of like an assistant in his house, who was actually a very wise woman as well. And when he was dying, she was praying for him to recover, as were all of his students outside of his house. Everyone was praying for him to recover. But she was in the house with him, caring for him, and she saw how much he was suffering. And the Talmud says that when she realized how badly he was suffering, she said, you know, I see that God is requesting you to come back, and your students are requesting you to stay here. And she said, you know what? Let God win, because I see you're suffering so much. But she also realized that as long as the students prayed, he wouldn't die. Their prayers were strong enough to keep him alive. So she went to the rooftop and she smashed the jug, which startled them, and they stopped praying for just a moment. But that moment was enough. And in that moment, his soul departed and he died. And actually, some of the commentaries on the Talmud say that we see from that you're actually allowed to pray for someone to die who's suffering. So now we never do anything to actively hasten death. We do not cause people to die faster, by Jewish law, we see that as not just allowing them to die, but causing them to die, but like removing interventions. But we can withhold things, meaning we can avoid starting aggressive interventions if it's in a case where a person is already in the dying process and they're suffering and they don't want to endure that kind of suffering. We don't have to prolong their suffering. So that is a case in which DNR, that's exactly what it's meant to be. The truth is, we try to use a different term. DNR implies like do not resuscitate, like you could if you want to, but you're not. The reality is that many very frail, dying patients, even if they are attempted to be resuscitated, it's futile. They don't recover and actually suffer broken bones and pain as a result in some cases. And so sometimes we use the phrase A&D instead of DNR, which means allow natural death.
So that's pretty heavy, and there are many things to talk about. And of course, we really can't, and I don't pretend to be an expert. It's dangerous because I know a little bit about many, many things. But essentially, in terms of the concept of euthanasia or taking someone's life or such, it's super complicated with technology today. And I actually recall that when I was working in Houston, I made a point of attending a class. This is at the time that Ariel Sharon was on life support for, I think, a couple years in Israel, the former prime minister, and he did not die in terms of Jewish law. I want to address a couple of those things. The first one is that the basic tenet of Judaism is that you should do everything you can to prolong life. But there is a term when someone is dying called a goses. You should not do anything to, make the dying process any longer. So you should not interfere with dying either. So those are two parts that have many prongs to them, but we do everything we can to, within reason, except when there's no hope, essentially. This is a very literal kind of thing, and there are many, many shades on this, and I actually am happy to have a discussion on it, not when I'm under the gun of a clock, however, but what it essentially says is we're not going to actively cause someone to die, and we're going to try everything possible within reason. But what Rabbi Weiner said is allowing a natural death, an A&D, is really the Jewish way, and with all of the nuances connected with those particular things. Going back to the Ariel Sharon thing, and the rabbi who taught this class basically said, this is off the record and this is theory and I don't know except I've experienced and blah, blah, blah. You cannot actively unplug someone once they're plugged in to whatever it is they're plugged into. So a big thought as to why would you initially plug them in if they are going to die anyway. Parenthetically, I have to tell you that in this particular interview, Rabbi Weiner talks about once in a while erring on the side of not unplugging and winning, but it's rare. It does once in a while, miracles do happen. But having said that, what this rabbi said was that sometimes there are just natural times when the machinery has to slow or stop. For example, cleaning or exchanging for a broken part or whatever. And people have a tendency when someone is dying to take their time, to not rush to get it. This is kind of sneaky. And for those of us who might not understand the requirements of strict adherence to Jewish law and the idea that there really is no variability, and this is on an extreme I'm describing, but that might not make sense. Well, just unplug the thing. Well, for people who cannot and will not and feel they should not and are prohibited from doing that, they have to find a way around it. And this may sound really weird, and it just stuck with me, and I'm not advocating but the idea of maintenance somehow enables sometimes deaths that need to happen where Jewish law prohibits an active unplugging of a particular thing. The other big issue is brain death versus heart death. Going back, originally, the Torah was clear. The heart had to stop beating before someone died. We know that now brain death is the preferred scientific worldwide definition of death, although religiously it is for an increasingly smaller number of Orthodox Jews still problematic. And I'm saying a really small number. I've had the privilege of carrying in my wallet for probably 25 years a halachic organ donor society organ donation card behind my driver's license, HODS.org, HODS.org. And there are thousands of people who, let's say, if you look at their pictures, you would paint them in the camp of being strictly observant of the strictest Torah laws. They've signed on to it too. So an increasing number of Jews of all denominations now accept brain death. Why is this important? Because of what I said, the organ donation. Because why is it important? It always comes up in conversation. To save a life is a mitzvah. And if you can do that, organ donation is absolutely a Jewish thing to do. You're going to have a small fraction of people who will not budge, but that fraction is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Again, I love that organization. And they've done so much good in terms of educating and getting people who believe that you can't accept brain death to understand that halachically you can, that it's been a very positive force in this particular area in the last 20 years or so. I also want to address very briefly and in a totally inadequate way, just remind you that in Judaism, suicide is prohibited. You cannot take your own life, just like you cannot take someone else's life. But there is this belief, kind of like having a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. There's also the belief that if someone has taken their own life, they can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Again, finding a way for the purposes of kindness, for the purposes of community, for the purposes of doing the right thing religiously. They're absolutely, well, basically, I'll tell you what it is. And I'm being very brief, but essentially that that moment that person was deemed sick. And I don't think that that's such a big stretch. And this person was ill, was not themselves when they took their life. So they cannot be punished for an illness. And of course, they can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So that kind of has gone away as a thing. And by the way, if you have if you got tats all over your body, not to worry. That also is basically, that's urban legend to the max. You can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Does anyone want to stop and anything stop me? I may have to defer or answer privately, but I'd like to know what may or may not be on your mind, if there's a correction or a comment. Okay. Be that way.
Cheryl, I have a question.
Yes, I hope I have an answer. Go ahead.
Okay. Since we say we should not interfere with the death, how come donations are okay? Because that prolongs, I mean, it gives life to the person that gets the donation, which I'm approve of. But why is that okay? Because we are interfering with that.
No, okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. You mean organ donation. Okay, yeah. Organ donation. Okay. Because there's a period of time, and this is clearly, I guess medically it's probably pretty clear, at least statistically, but when someone is defined as, the term is goses in Hebrew, someone is dying, there is essentially no hope. That's when you do, you're not interfering with dying. In other words, if someone is not actively dying, if that becomes a sickness, an illness, then this is a cure. Okay. This is a fix. So that's the way to look at it. But that's a great question. So I appreciate that question. Okay. One other thing on this particular topic, again, just so that you're familiar with traditional sources and a bit conversant on this. This is an article, and it's a long one. They all are, by somebody who lost a child. And he references, I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but he is talking about his view of the end of days and such. In a central tenet of Judaism is that at the end of days, the righteous dead shall live again on this earth, and we shall be reunited with them. It's for this reason that my wife and I put in the top of Ariel's headstone, until we meet again. I just give that reference to explain that sentence, okay? But this is the source that people know. Perhaps you've heard the 13 Articles of Faith of Maimonides, also known as the Rambam. He articulated many centuries ago those 13 principles of faith, whereby each and every single one of traditional Jews individually and as a group collectively, is absolutely essential in understanding the theology at the core. And the 13th principle is, I believe with complete faith that there will be a resuscitation of the dead, whenever the wish emanates from the Creator. Rambam wrote this over 800 years ago in his commentary on the Mishnah. I'm sorry, there's a lot of stuff in here. Okay. All right, well, I think that's all. That's all. Okay, so I believe with complete faith that there will be a resuscitation of the dead whenever the wish emanates from the Creator. So that is at some point, so the word resuscitation he uses is the word that we might think of as resurrection. And it might be really weird to you, never thought about it, but in Judaism, in traditional Judaism, there is that word is used and it is believed. When and how? Is this going to be at the time of the Messiah? That's one of the most popular interpretations. So let me go to something else right now. And this is a more maybe palatable and better articulated than I'm doing kind of summary of this. So what we do understand, all of us being human, is that there's a mystery about this. It's one of the greatest mysteries that we face. What happens to us when we die? Do we ever see our loved ones? Will they know us? Will we know them? There's lots and lots of questions, and Judaism doesn't offer definitive answers. If this were a class in basic Christianity, it is very, very clear that you will be reunited in the kingdom of God if you accept Jesus and live according to Christianity. That's one of the core reasons that passionate Christians are eager to convert Jews who they love and care about, to Christianity, because they are worried much more about their souls after their afterlife than they are about their life here. In Judaism, we've got totally the opposite kind of concern. We're much more concerned about what's going on here. Anyway, so some of the cores. There is an afterlife, and texts from every era in Judaism identify some world where people go. In the Bible, the word Sheol comes, and then we poorly translate it as Hades or hell, because we don't have a good thing in English. That's often with Hebrew words. The concept doesn't exactly exist. We do the best we can. And sometimes in Judaism, it's called, and I like this one, Yeshiva Shel Mala, the school on high. And since I'm a lifelong learner, I'm really happy to know that I can keep learning even after I die. Another thing that's interesting in Judaism in terms of heaven, and this is definitive, is that it's got an open door policy. It's not a gated community, and the righteous of any people or any faith shall have a place in it. That's another reason why Jews are not so worried about this conversion thing, getting people to believe as we do. The righteous of all nations shall inherit a place in the world to come. Our actions, not our specific beliefs, determine our fate. Hell. Good news, folks. There's no concept of hell in Judaism. The closest we get is what one of my wonderful professors, Zichrono Livracha, Rabbi Byron Sherwin, taught, which is, just think of it as a rehab center or a fat farm. The most you can go there for, if you're really, really bad, if you're normal bad, it's 11 months. If you're really, really bad, it's 12 months. But you're gonna be rehabilitated. There's no eternal burning in hell. Okay. there's another thing in terms of the vagueness, just to throw out some of the ideas, that the afterlife can take many forms, and there's diverse beliefs, as there are diverse beliefs in any aspects of Judaism. From the traditional view of expecting the body and the flesh to be resurrected, to the idea that we live on in our children and our grandchildren, and to maybe just some sort of sense of heaven without any specifics on it. And there's really not a big thing. The Jewish heaven probably has more to do with lox and bagels than it does with white uh, skirty outfits and halos around. So at any rate, so the afterlife, which this is actually the one that I grew up with, and maybe some of you did also, is here on earth. So one strand of Jewish thought sees heaven as a transitory place where souls reside after death. They reside until they reunite with their physical bodies. Rabbi Shmuley Boteach wrote a book about this, The Wolf Shall Lie with the Lamb, the Messiah in Hasidic thought. And this approach differs from reincarnation, since the return to this happens only in the Messianic time, not in regular occurrence. Rabbi Isaac Luria, and you guys know him from Lacha Dodi Likrat Kala, that song, okay? Who's a Kabbalistic rabbi of 16th century Spain. He essentially taught about resurrection, coming back in a different form to kind of get a redo, to live a better life. And there's this horrible joke that I can't tell, but about coming back as buffalo in Wyoming, you know, and grazing and saying, well, maybe the other kind of life, I should have done something different when I was human. But that there is actually, so you can kind of find lots of different thoughts. And it's been my experience, or it's Cheryl's theory, that it kind of depends, the theory, since we were a diaspora spread out around the world, kind of depends on who you hung out with. And clearly influenced by neighbors in terms of their theology about what the world to come or life after death would, would be. So another one is that we live on through others. And the Reformed Jewish Prayer Book expresses this idea in the metaphor of a leaf and a tree. The leaf drops to the ground, but it nourishes the soul so that more plants and trees spring up. And the same is true in our lives. We nourish the future through the influence we have on those who follow us. And it can happen in unimaginable ways. And I'd like to share with you a brief quote from novelist Dara Horn. My mother came from a very assimilated family, not very involved in the Jewish community, but they sent her to Hebrew school, and she was inspired by one of her Hebrew school teachers. He ended up becoming a professor at NYU, and she did her doctorate with him. It's because of this man that my mother taught me Hebrew. It's because of this man that I'm as involved as I am in Judaism. He had a profound influence on me, even though I did not know him or have any biological connection to him. So Dara Horn is not alone, because all of us manifest the lives and the influence of those who came before us. So let's go a little bit to a couple of things that you might not know too much about, or that you'd like a review on in terms of death and mourning customs. Just one moment.
Could I ask a question?
Sure, please do.
Could you elaborate a little more about the soul? Do traditional Jews believe in a soul, and if so, what happens after death to the soul?
Well, that's the question that we're asking. What happens after? But yes, believe in a soul. Yes, there is something eternal beyond the body. That is absolutely a strong traditional, unwavering belief. What happens to it is kind of our discussion now, which is, in all honesty, you can find someone who's going to tell you with assurance, but then you can find somebody a town away who's going to tell you something different with assurance. We just know. So and that's what's honest about Judaism, I think, which is, and I have to say that there's space for all of it. You're not going to get your believing wrong. You're not going to get that you're in error. That's some people may see that as a deficit in Judaism. I actually see it as a strength. There is a saying in Judaism that kind of sort of belongs here or works here, which is there are 70 faces of Judaism. Meaning there's not one, it's not my way or the highway, but what happens to the soul is exactly what we don't know. So when you find out, Ellen, please tell us, okay?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I wonder about the value of being buried in Israel, or when I visited Jerusalem, they showed where people want to be buried close to the gate or the wall for some value.
They're going to be resurrected first. But first, if you want to be first in line, yeah. And there's another thing which is very common, which is to have some soil from Israel put in your grave, even if you're buried in Boise, Idaho, or wherever you might be buried. Yeah, right. But yes, that's the reason. And my great grandfather, Hillel Jacobson, on the other side, Jackie, he walked from Lithuania so that he could die in Palestine to be there, and he's buried on Mount of Olives. So that is a strong belief for a long time.
Cheryl,
Yes,
yeah, it certainly is. I mean, my grandfather is buried there. My brother-in-law had his body transported to be buried there. It definitely is still part of modernity.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure. Judy,
Back to the organ donation for one quick moment.
please.
Is it considered a desecration? Aren't we not allowed to desecrate our bodies? Is it considered a desecration if we remove an organ and give it to someone else?
Desecrating your body is a law that exists. You're 100% right, Judy. The only thing is in Judaism, and this is the always yes but thing, but it's true and it's valid, which is circumstances matter. Circumstances actually matter in Judaism. For example, a woman, I attend all of these courses about having plastic surgery. If you feel bad about yourself and you don't want to go out and it's going to hinder your life, that's considered an optional surgery, but so yes, you can't desecrate your body, but yes, you can, because there's a bigger purpose. So there are lots of those kinds of things about desecrating bodies. You know that the girls in Europe, Jewish girls, always had their ears pierced, almost at birth for 10 million years. So that's another thing, that because of they'd be more attractive to the opposite sex. That's another, we can argue that another time, but there's always a because, is what I'm saying. So the because, which is the more important, because in terms of, you can break any law except idolatry. What's that called? Oh, I can't believe I can't think. Incest. To save a life, anything. So saving a life, it excuses almost everything.
So there's Orthodox people have organ donation.
I wish I could show you. I'm sorry, it's downstairs. My house is being painted. If I really get gutsy, I'll show you this room. I've got a bass violin on the floor here. I got chairs all over, and I can't get down the steps right now. I'd show you my card. Yeah, not only, first of all, the Orthodox people have so many shades of Orthodoxy, but that's what I was explaining. My Halachic Organ Donor Society card is an Orthodox organization.
I see.
And they have pictures of probably 200 people. The vast majority of them are wearing black hats, or their hair covered. Elaine, what's up?
Yeah, how does the Hever Kaddish fit into this whole picture?
That's you're jumping the gun. I'm trying to get there. No.
Great minds think alike.
Okay. So let's talk about that. And I'm gonna go fast through some, and then we'll maybe delve a little bit on some of these. So terms that you probably know or heard are Hever Kaddish. We're going to talk about that. Shomer. Let me just go through this. I was going to read, but I'm going to a few things that I want to sort of pontificate, and we'll just probably hit two of them in some detail. So the first thing is that, and I'm going to misstep just because I'm watching the clock. Take a deep breath, and if you have to go, then go. We have until 1:15. We probably are fine, but so much to tell in so little time. So first thing I'm gonna take in terms of just review that in terms of Jewish death and mourning, if a person is ill, it's actually an obligation to perform the mitzvah visiting them when possible. One thing. Now, in terms of what a dying person traditionally says is that they would say the Shema, and they would do, if they have an apology to make, this is an opportunity to make it. And a third one is to give, for example, the way Yitzhak did on his deathbed with his sons, give your, remember we learned about ethical wills and sending your directions to your family. This was done orally, that you tell your children what you want them to do, and task them with moral responsibilities at that time. So then from death to burial, this is a very special time. And as you know, Judaism traditionally buries as quickly as possible without embalming. It's kind of dust to dust kind of thing. And in that particular time, the person is, mourners are not even officially mourners. It's not exactly the mourning period. It's sort of this preparation period. But what is traditionally done about hearing the death or witnessing the death is, I have a close relative, is that you tear a small section of your clothing, usually on the collar, to symbolize your grief. You've heard of rending your garments, I think is the expression. This is a modern version of it. And an even more modern version is wearing a little black ribbon, which is often done at the cemetery, not done upon hearing immediate the time of death. What's interesting, and I learned this in the prep, and that chose to say there's always time to learn, so you can always learn stuff, is the tear is on the right side of the body for anyone except a parent. For a parent, it's on the left side or the left collar. I wasn't aware of that. And then many people abstain from work and don't go to parties and those kinds of things throughout the morning. So one mourning period. The body of the person who died is traditionally watched until the grave. And the concept is called the shomer shomeret, is a guard the time of until the time of burial. And frequently, and I've signed up for it, it's an hour and a half shift or something, often in a funeral home. And psalms are said while sitting with the body. And this is kind of, in our culture, spooky. When you actually do it, it doesn't seem spooky. It actually seems beautiful. And then the body goes through, and I'm going to read you a personal account of it, the ritual purification and washing done by a group of volunteers. And it's called the Chevra Kadisha. And Chevra is from the word chaver, friends, the holy friends, or the holy community, the holy society. And they wash the body and they prepare it for burial. And the deceased is dressed traditionally in a simple white linen shroud. And if they have in a talit, and the to make the talit unusable, to show that mourning, to show that their life is over, the fringes are cut off of the talit. And this is basic. Part of this is also to symbolize that we are all the same, that there is a rich person doesn't get dressed fancier. It's similar to the choosing of a plain coffin. These are also realistically to decompose quicker. But basically in death, we are all the same. There's not a question of money is not important, or flouting the capacity to have a fancy coffin is really not a Jewish tradition. So let me read you lessons for the living from the Burial Society. The lady's name is Holly Blue Hawkins, and she spoke at the Limud Festival in England. And I don't have a date on this. Okay, Limud is a big learning worldwide festival. Okay, so Chevra Kadisha it literally means sacred society. Traditionally, it doesn't just take care of the dead. It looks after the indigent people and people who are bereaved or ill. It takes care of the cemetery. It's a broad stretch of caring for the vulnerable. Some of us are working hard towards bringing it back, doing all those things. In the past, every time Jews had to move from one place to another, the first thing that they did was create a cemetery, not a synagogue or a general store. Because in our tradition, when somebody dies, we try to bury them within the first 24 hours. Sacred society sounds like some kind of grand. It sounds too grand. I prefer holy friends. This is a holy order within Judaism, doing this work. When I'm teaching now, I don't say funeral or burial, I say levaya, which means accompaniment. That's the most important thing. Accompany. I've been doing tahara, which is the purification of the body, the washing of the body and the dressing. I had been doing it for years before I understood that when you're dealing with someone with something intense that you just want to get through it as quickly as you can, that's when it's most important to slow down. Right at the point when you most want to speed up, take a deep breath and invoke the sacred in whatever you do. That's had an impact in my life in all kinds of ways. When I'm dealing with the body of someone who may have had a terrible illness or died in a tragic accident, I'll take extra time. Carefully, gently brushing hair, washing the limbs. It doesn't matter whether the person is literally in that body. Once during a very difficult tahara, we began singing Ana Bakoach. We started nimguning. You know what nimguning is? Bitty bitty bye. In other words, without words, a melody. Niguning. And that's when the sacredness came back into the room. How do you turn a difficult task into a prayer? We pray with our hands while doing tahara. As my friend Richard Light says, it's like midwifing souls. How cool is that? People say to me, I don't understand how you can do such depressing work and be such a bubbly person. And I say, it's because I do this work that I'm a bubbly person. The last person I did was 102 years old. She really liked attention in life. She liked to look good. And if she had a bad haircut, you hear about it. As we were working on her, music started pouring into the window from outside. It was just so perfect. And in that preparation room, as we were tying the knots on the gowns, I found myself softly singing, "You baby, nobody but you," because this really was all about her. Next part, she titles, "Death isn't a moment, it's a process, and it isn't gross." I believe the connection between life and death doesn't sever like you're cutting a string. It's gradual. Someone once said that death is like drawing hair out of a glass of milk. So we're so programmed in our society to go, ooh, scary, bodies. But why? We say Tehorahi over the body. That's what I said. Our soul is you give us our soul. I started the reading with that, the class with that. We say Tehorahi, and we say it every day in our morning prayers. Elohai nishama shenatata bi Tehorahi. My God, the soul you gave me is pure. I always say Tehorahi 3 times. The way we do when we are pouring buckets of water on the bodies in the cemetery in the ceremony, this is the tahara, after we've cleaned them. It's basically going through their last sponge bath. And that's how I start my day. It's something you do with reverence. One day it will be my friends taking care of me. Knowing that keeps me more alive. Am I going to squander this day? As Rabbi Hillel said, if not now, when? We say to repent the day before you die. But when is that going to be? Who knows? In the bedtime Shema, we practice dying a little bit. Every night when we go to bed, it's all there in our tradition, but we lost touch with it. Just thought that was an interesting. By the way, in the morning we say Modani, mean thank you for refreshing me. So in the morning you recognize that you're woken up and you have breath again. So that's hopefully that addressed a little bit from a unique way the Chevra Kadisha for you, Elaine, and for others. Okay. Historically, Jews have been opposed to cremation. Jewish tradition has been changing. You have to discuss that with your local rabbi, and a funeral director can also help you navigate that particular topic. But I have to recognize that it is becoming more common. Funerals are not conducted on Shabbat or on Jewish holidays, and they usually occur during the daytime, and flowers are discouraged in order to keep funerals simple. Many families suggest charities to which people may contribute to the memory of the deceased. The truth is, in sadness and in gratitude, giving charity is a very Jewish thing to do. And also, I have to say, an appreciation when something wonderful happens. So charity is the way. I also witnessed very recently at the funeral of a close relative in New York that this rabbi who, with bad judgment and not very cool guy, in my opinion, anonymous enough. There are more than one rabbi in New York, so I can be safe in telling you that. A non-Jewish co-worker brought flowers, and he stopped her and said, "We Jews don't bring flowers to the cemetery." So after his little talk, I went up to her and I said that this person would really appreciate this, and more importantly, that you're here, and that simply ain't true. It just was wrong. So I'm never say never, because kindness is a bigger commandment than flowers or donations. And not embarrassing someone is even bigger. But I share that with you personally because it still grates at me. And I don't think anyone else felt comfortable contradicting him, but Cheryl felt totally comfortable, quietly, not in front of anybody else, contradicting him. Okay. Let's see what else I want to tell you. I need to talk to you about the Shiva a little bit, because maybe you don't know this, maybe you do, which is after leaving the cemetery as a transition, there's a ceremonial washing of the hands, and many cemeteries have water available to wash your hands. This is making a havdil, a distinction between death and life. It's not for sanitary purposes, but that is a tradition. And sometimes if you're going to visit a home, a shiva call after coming from the cemetery, there will be water, a bucket outside the front door. That's what that's about. So just so that you're familiar with it, if it seems strange to you. I have always felt, and more so now than ever, that Judaism is psychologically wise in many of the things that we do, in terms of life cycle events, in terms of the philosophy of things are given to us in order to enjoy, not in excess, but not with guilt either. And another thing is some of our rituals are there for very correct reasons. And the concept of mourning, which is basically done in stages traditionally, is very healthy because it gives you a gradual release. It gives you community support when you most need it, and that gradually diminishes. And it also gives you a deadline, which is you can't, like the women when I studied in Mexico, women who were wearing their black viuda thing, their black, I don't know what they're called, the outfit, the widow outfit for their whole lives. You can't do that in Judaism. You have to come out of it. There's a time to go on with life. And so these particular stages, which are incremental until this funeral, I mentioned this one, which is basically leave me alone, do what you need to do. But afterwards, essentially coming back from the cemetery, there's a lot to talk about, but in summary, it is essentially that communities are expected to provide for needs in terms of meal, and there are traditional meals that vary, and not to make any demands on the person. The first 7 days are heavy. Low seats and soft, not real shoes, not leather shoes, are traditional. Low seats often in Shiva houses that I see is basically the cushions are taken off of the sofa. That's the way seats become lower, and that works. These aren't laws, these are traditions. There's also basically a tradition that you don't ring the bell and wait for anybody to come to the door. The door is left open during hours when you can go and you walk in quietly, see what the opportunity is to comfort the mourner. So that's 7 days of that. Now I have to tell you that in today's world, I very often see a notice of a Shiva minyan. So the word Shiva is Sheva, which means 7, and it's 7 days. So now it means something different, which is a one-time event to comfort the mourners, which can be anything from an hour to maybe 2 or 3 days or something. So the word Shiva, the original meaning of it, like so many words, in traditional communities is still 7, but in non-traditional communities is different tweaks on it. I have a problem with that personally, having gone through mourning, that the 7 days are intense, and it's good to have 7 days. A half hour or an hour doesn't cut it. One of the things that you don't say during a Shiva call is he's in a better place. Jews don't believe that. If you say it, we'll forgive you, but I'm just saying that's a Christian idea, a better place. This is the place, and this is where we have a job. This is where we're partners of God, and our place is to be here and tikkuning the olam. That's the job description, okay? And then the things that you have tikkun the olam with are going to carry over and live on for the next people. In other words, the fact that we were here made a difference. That's a big part of it. The next place has a question mark, as we've discussed a little bit, and it might be a better place, but that is not part of our theology, this is what you are earned for. Having said that, with total respect, I understand that that's a comforting thing that many people need to hear. Many people need to hear if they lose a loved one, that they're in a better place. But I just want you to understand that theologically, it's really contrary to Judaism. All right, the next period of mourning is the Shloshim. If you know your Hebrew, Shalosh, Achad Shteim Shalosh, Shloshim is 30. And the 30-day period, mourners don't attend parties or celebrations, and generally they don't shave or cut their hair and don't listen to music. And then the final period is Abelut, which is observed only for a parent. There are people who choose to observe it for a longer time, but that is for 12 months after the burial. And again, you refrain from celebrations. You certainly go back to work. Depending on your community, most people do shave and clean and don't cut their hair and things like that. But a lot don't listen to music. And if you've been to traditional weddings and you happen to be in Abelut, there will usually be a room where people are served that they don't have to listen to the band if they choose to, because they want to attend the wedding. You basically support the bride and groom, but the party aspect of it, which is the music, is out of their mourning custom. So sometimes you'll see the side room, and that's really what that is about. Headstone, we think it's a year. That's an Ashkenazi custom. It doesn't have to be a year. In some places it's 30 days. What do you say? Zichrona livracha, may her memory be for a blessing. Zichrona livracha. Zichrona livracha. Now it's a guy, it's Zichrono livracha. Zichrono, may his memory be for a blessing. In Judaism, another interesting thing is that we make a big deal of Yizkor. Yizkor means to remember. And it's totally fine to remember somebody on what was their birthday. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But understanding that the concept of Yizkor is to remember what they did in life and how they impacted you on life, and have that basically in our practice, ingrained in our practice. On the holidays we say Yizkor, as you know, on 4 holidays, and on the day of the person's passing. Those are times when you reflect on what they did and what they meant to you. And so there's nothing wrong with a birthday, but in fact, birthday is the potential, and this is the accomplishment and the focus on that. Typically, the mourning period or the Yizkor period requires that we have a tradition of waiting, the headstone kind of setting, the 1 year in the Ashkenazi kind of means that the year has passed where we've experienced every holiday after we've gone through a full cycle with the loss of that loved one as a reminder. And remembering in Judaism is a mitzvah. Yizkor, to remember, is a mitzvah. That's why we say Zichrono livracha, Zichrona livracha. Okay. I'm going to stop again. I do have more stuff. I really do want to share with you a couple things, but let me take a breath. Talk, guys. Anything to say? Wow. Okay.
Cheryl?
Yes.
Cheryl, there's
Hi.
one other custom. I don't know. Hi. There's one other custom. Before we leave the person who is sitting Shiva, we say,
Right. Thank you. It's right here. I missed Berlin. Thank you. Okay. May you be comforted among the mourners of Zion. That is the formula that you say. That's the goodbye. May you be comforted among And zichron is also the same word, yisker. But benachem is, oh, some of you know the name Nahum. That means comfort, and that's the word. Benachem, may you be comforted. That's the word. The name Nahum or Nahama, if you know that girl's name, those are all the word comfort, and that's that blessing. But it means thank you for sharing that, because sometimes you don't know what to say. And many people feel funny saying hi and bye. So we have, may you be comforted among the mourners of Zion. Anything else?
Cheryl, what about the idea of covering mirrors in the home for Shiva?
You can probably extract the reason for that, which is basically if you're not putting on makeup, you're crying, you're not, those 7 days, you're not worrying about yourself. Vanity goes by the window. So that's just to discourage you from doing that. It's a strong custom, and often customs are stronger than law, but it definitely is out there. And one of my friends learned that she was of Jewish heritage. Those of you who know that I'm involved with the B'nai Anusim, because she was at a funeral in southern Mexico, and the mirrors were covered, and that's how she found out. She had no clue. She knew she she was Jewish by choice, but at any rate, so it's a strong, pervasive custom. Thank you for asking.
One other thing, I was always told that before, I'm not sure if it's before or during Shiva, the soul is kind of hovering, and that has something to do with the light, the candle that you light.
That's a belief. The truth is, I don't know, but there's absolutely a belief that essentially the soul is not set for a while, not set immediately. And that's part of the reason that the souls that need to go to rehab have that 11 months of hovering. And there's also a belief, there's an expression, all of us know what an aliyah is, going to the Torah for an aliyah, but aliyah means a raising or going up. And there's also a belief that you want to raise the soul, the neshama, closer to heaven. And there's this whole big controversy, because there are people who say, are accustomed to saying, may his soul have an aliyah, or may her soul have an aliyah, get closer to heaven during some period of time. And there's also a belief, if you do a mitzvah in their name, you're bringing the soul closer to heaven. I thought that was really a belief, and then I started researching it. It is absolutely a belief. And then there's an absolute belief on the other side. Rav Chai Hagaon concludes that it is totally, absolutely nothing anyone can do to elevate the soul of the dead mirror. So, like anything else in Judaism, we've learned the word before, a machlochet. We don't know.
Cheryl,
yes.
Cheryl, I think it's also something that we can learn when we go to make a Shiva call, that our presence there is more important than what we say.
Okay, and more important than us or our inconvenience too. Thank you.
And so the idea, actually, you're not supposed to say anything until the mourner speaks to you.
That's a custom.
So as a custom, but so often, and I'm sure for those of us who have been on those low chairs, people say things that you just go, I wish you'd just keep your mouth shut. I mean, and I think it's we don't mean to hurt somebody, and we feel we have to say something, but I think it's more our presence there is more important than what we say. And oftentimes walking out, you will see that maybe near the door, they will have plates with dollars on it, so that you can give it to, so that you can give tzedakah, that this will go to someplace else, so that your being there also does a mitzvah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to extend that even to visiting someone who's dying. I'm so uncomfortable. How could I do it? It'll be so typical. It's not about you. And usually, from my limited experience, it feels right. It feels good. It's not so difficult, because at the end of the day, they're still them. They're still them. Like, don't focus on that wedge that's missing, but the whole person is, appreciates your presence. It's just true kindness. It feels good afterwards too. So thank you. Absolutely.
Cheryl,
Yes.
my mother had two things that she was very conscious of. Number one, you could not walk in the house without shoes, because if you wear only socks or stockings, that's what the mourners do. So that was a no-no. And now my grandchildren come and they take off their shoes because they believe that you don't bring the dirt inside the house. So I have a problem there. The other thing was that two people could not dress a person, like help a child, because that's what they do to the dead. More than one person dresses them.
Well, these are all superstitions in a particular community. I mean, I'm sure there are many that we could share, and they're important for many people to be aware of. But you have to understand that these are, they vary by community. I'm sure that's a common one. I'm sure that's a common. I have heard about it.
I guess Ellen was bouncing her head, saying, "I
Okay,
guess
so
you heard that."
so it sounds familiar. Okay, I'm gonna. There are two things. There's lots of stuff, but anyway, two things that I want to share with you. The first one, and let's see if this works tech-wise. This is about a minute of a podcast. This is from Take One, Daf Yomi, studying Talmud. This is from the tractate of Pesach, which was months and months ago. But this is Rabbi Ari Lamb talking about. Again, it's out of context because I don't have time to do the beginning or the end. But basically, the reference is essentially to the afterlife or the world to come. Let's see if I even have the clip in the right place. If not, forgive me.
Passages in the entire Talmud, and in the immortal words of one of the great moral philosophers of our time, Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, if I'm not going to be eternally rewarded for my behavior, I'd sure like to know now. Look, the world to come or the afterlife is one of those things that on the one hand is totally irrelevant to everyday life because we don't actually get to experience it until we die. So you might suppose that we shouldn't bother thinking about it at all, which is basically the sense that you get from like the conventional wisdom in the media or pop culture that always says, oh, Jews don't believe in the afterlife. But actually, as this passage from the Talmud reminds us, Jews have actually thought a lot about the afterlife and reward and punishment after death. Now, why is that? I mean, it's definitely true that much more than any other major faith, Judaism is, relentlessly focused on living life well in this world. So why spend time focusing on the afterlife, even if we believe in it? And I think the answer is because it's actually a really great way to help us think about what really matters in our world. So when we think about what things will be like in the afterlife, who will be punished, who will be rewarded, that's another way of saying, hey, here's how we wish things could be in this world if it weren't so imperfect, right? The afterlife is our way of imagining the world not as it is, but as it ought to be.
So I'm going to conclude with a short reading, but before that, I just want to tell you that what I've deduced from this is that what happens to the soul, if we have a soul, is a mystery. And the mystery is going to continue. And if any of you, I've had the privilege of meeting somebody who had a near-death experience and shared with me what she saw and she didn't use the words, but kind of left the message. It's like removing a hair from milk, but then she came back. Having said that, that was her belief, and there's space in Judaism for that belief. And there's also space in Judaism for your belief. But Judaism assures us that there is something eternal. It's called neshama. Neshama is the word for soul. There is something eternal. I want to read a closing thing from a Yizkor book as a thought. If some messenger were to come to us with the offer that death should be overthrown, but with the one inseparable condition that birth should also cease, if the existing generation were given the chance to live forever, but on the clear understanding that never again would there be a child or a youth or a first love, never again new persons with new hopes, new ideas, new achievements, ourselves for always and never any others. Could the answer be in doubt? We shall not fear the summons of death. We shall remember those who have gone before us and all those who will come after us. Anything else? Guys, maybe I can tell you now, I have one class by popular demand. Thank you, Roberta, and who is my new presiding officer, or I don't know what the exact word is. And thanks to Cindy Glazer, who has been my partner in crime and an incredible support for these past several years. But we set up someone very kindly said they couldn't go the whole summer without Cheryl, which I can't believe. You probably could. But we did set up a class for August the 17th in the summer. It's actually only 2 months from now. I have no idea what I'm going to be talking about. I would love to do a potpourri, I think is it. I'm losing my French. I'd love for people to just, with no commitment on my part, to throw questions at me by email before you can send them to Lisa and she can forward them to me. Thank you, Lisa, for volunteering without volunteering or anything else. But, or you can email me directly or you can ask me that day. But that's one of the things that I'm thinking about. But there's also so many little things that I wish I could tell you that I've never have time for. So maybe we'll do that. We'll see what happens between now and then. In the meantime, I wish you a good summer. There's a lot happening. There's a lot to focus on that's negative. This is a time when we have to personally be thankful for the things that we have that are positive to keep us going and keep on doing what you're doing and all those good things that you're doing. And thank you to everyone. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.